Well, good morning and welcome to church. Online, welcome. Hebron, hello. Jill, what's up? And DeMont Wheatfield, good morning. Thanks for coming out to church today. And no matter what you believe, this is a place where no one's perfect and everyone's welcome. And we are in the second week of a series called The Beginning and the End of Your World. And last week, we learned that a lot of people are really concerned about creation and the apocalypse. Everybody wants to know all about it, but interestingly enough, God is not that concerned about telling us about it. In fact, less than 3% of the Bible is allocated towards the beginning and the end of the world. We also looked at population in the world across all of time, and we determined that less than 3% of the humans who will walk the earth will experience the beginning or the end of the world. So we have a 97% chance of not experiencing it. Nevertheless, I did give you a summary of the beginning and the end of the world. And one of the key things we talked about last week is Genesis in the Bible is not about creation. The main point in the first 3 chapters of the first book of the Bible is that humans used to be able to see God face to face. There was an overlap between heaven and earth, and this was truly remarkable, right? We could walk with God in the Garden of Eden. And we learned that that relationship with God was broken when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it wasn't that God said, you can't be in my presence. It was that we could no longer bear to be in God's presence when we understood his glory and our shame. And because of that, we could no longer see God face to face. So our relationship with God was broken, only to be barely maintained through the temple system and the prophets. But through Christ, because of Jesus, we can once more have a relationship with God. And as a church, you remember I brought in these rings. They're not a magic trick. They're rings. I wish I could do magic, but I'm just a pastor. But we talked about how, the church, it's like a Venn diagram, right? And it's bringing the presence of God onto earth. And, as the church grows, the presence of God, his kingdom grows on earth, but it's not a linear progression, right? Sometimes it contracts. We talked about how in the Middle Ages, when the Muslim Caliphate exterminated the Jews in North Africa, there was a contraction in the church. And obviously in the 1920s, there was a contraction in the church. But, through the Great Awakening and Billy Graham and movements like that, the church has grown, and today I think we're experiencing another shrinking of the church in America. And then we learned that as individuals, our spiritual life mirrors the life of the church, right? When we give our life to Christ, all of a sudden God's presence is in our life. And the moment these circles overlap, we are Christians, we're saved. But the process of spiritual growth called sanctification, it happens over time as we experience more and more of God's presence in our life. But like the church, it's not linear. Sometimes the presence of God contracts in our life, and it grows and contracts. And the hope is over time, we'll experience more and more of God's presence. Today, I want to talk about, this is going to be tough, okay? Didn't use my headset today for reasons and things. But today, I want to talk about that process of sanctification, that process of spiritual growth, which is the process of the gradual increase of God's presence in our life. And because when I think about the beginning of the world and the beginning of the end of your personal world, I want nothing more than for us to experience the most of God's presence at the end of our life. And I think a lot of us, when we first gave our life to Christ, we had these big dreams of doing great things for God's kingdom. I mean, when we think about God, even if you're an atheist, you're like, man, if I believed in God, I would want to do great things for his kingdom. And there's this old Super Bowl commercial that really, I think a lot, when I think about the process of sanctification, I think about this old commercial from 1999, and I actually had it pulled up. If you're watching online on the Facebook live stream, there's like a 30% chance we're going to get taken down for this. So if you just go to our website, First.church, if we do get taken down, you can go there. But go ahead and play that commercial.
When I grow up, I want to file all day.
I want to claw my way up to middle management.
Be replaced on a whim.
I want to have a brown nose.
I want to be a yes man.
Yes woman.
Yes, sir. Coming, sir.
Anything for a raise, sir.
When I grow up,
I want to be underappreciated.
Be paid less for doing the same job.
I want to be forced into early retirement.
I love that ad because I feel like the juxtaposition of what those kids are actually going to become and what we dream about is so different. Nobody dreams of having the life that so many of us end up in. And I think the big question today is, why do our dreams and the reality of our life take this diverging path for so many of us? I mean, I think spiritually the story is so similar. No one wakes up when they give their life to Christ and is like, you know what, I really want to have a stagnant faith. I really want to have such an uninspiring faith that's barely alive that I get to be the last generation in my family to follow Christ. No one says, I want to leave a legacy of wounding and hurt from my hypocrisy spiritually in my children and grandchildren. Nobody says, I want to turn people away from Christ, from the way that I go to church yet run my business. I want to be inconsistent, loving God, but then blaming God with bitterness and anger. I want to love Christ and his eternal victory, but I want to feel like a victim and hold on to petty grudges and unforgiveness. Nobody dreams of that. Nobody says, I want to love Christ, but I want to be absent from church more than half the time. I want to get absolutely blasted on Saturday night, but then judge people for working on Sunday morning as I sit in my church pew hungover. Nobody says, I want to have a faith that enters a deep crisis every time I face a trial of any kind. These are not the dreams that many of us has. And what made that ad so poignant to me is the fact that so many of us end up becoming something that is so different than we dream of. And it happens because this process of spiritual growth called sanctification does not roll out correctly in our lives. I think everybody, man, when you think about a faith journey, you think, I want to finish well. I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to see hundreds of people find Christ through his power in my life. I think lots of people say, I want to see my spouse and kids love Christ because they see Christ in me. I want to be wise, mature, consistent, and full of steadfast, unwavering, resilient faith. And I think the big question today is why do we lose sight of our dreams? That's a big question. Why does the end of our life spiritually not match what we dream of it becoming? Why in the middle of our lives do we compromise the goals that we want for the end of our life? In other words, what stops sanctification and spiritual growth from happening in our lives? I'm going to talk about that today. This message is on sanctification, but I have to be honest with you. I ended up having this message grow a lot longer than I intended to have it be, so I have to split it into 2 weeks. And this week is just really the foundational point. So if you want the whole message on sanctification, you got to come back next week. I swear, I don't try and do this on purpose. I'm just long-winded. I'm a pastor. It's the way it goes. But as many of you know, and I want to lay the foundation for these next 2 weeks with a story. As many of you know, I love boating, okay? I'm a boater. I love going boating. It's the cheapest way to have a family adventure when you've got 4 kids. Because let's be honest, if we go anywhere, it's going to be really expensive. But a lot of you think, oh, Pastor, must be nice having a boat. Let me just justify that a little bit. I'm totally not, health and wealth, prosperity, whatever. I have 2 family vehicles, and the purchase price of both my vehicles combined was less than $4,400, okay? I spent a lot more on maintenance, possibly because I paid so little for the vehicles. But the most expensive thing that I own, it's actually worth more than all of my other possessions combined, okay? Except for my house, but I don't know what that. My parents own half of it, and the bank owns the other half of it. But anyway, the most expensive thing that I own, worth more than all my other possessions combined, is my inboard direct drive, open bow, American Water Ski Association tournament certified world championship record-setting water ski boat. And I love it, obviously. It's a 1993 Malibu Echelon. And when I bought it 4 years ago, I think I paid $7,800 for it before taxes and fees, right? I know that sounds like a lot, but think of it this way. This summer, we've burned 631 gallons of gas thus far at the lake. And the pandemic, in the meantime, has doubled the value of my ski boat, which is just crazy. So basically, if I sold my ski boat today, I would have made a small profit, including all of the gas and maintenance that I paid for over the last 4 years. So guys, if you're trying to talk your wife into a boat, just know it doesn't stand for bust out another $1,000. It stands for cheap family fun that you can make a profit on, okay? That's it. But I'm not selling it, just so you know. If you want to buy it, you can't. No, not doing it. I love my boat, and I love it for so many reasons. But as you know, one of the reasons I really love it is I love teaching my kids to do hard things. And this last weekend, not this last one, but the one before it, 1 week ago, we decided it was time to teach my 3-year-old daughter, Aurora, how to kneeboard. And this daughter of mine, you have to understand, she is freakishly cute. Like, it's really difficult. She is so cute. She's the sweetest little thing. She's kind. She's helpful. She's got a great little attitude. And Kristen and I have been good about making our 3 older kids do things at the appropriate ages. But with Aurora, we've just been a little hesitant because when she cries, the world cries. I mean, she's just the sweetest. But this last weekend, I do have a video of, and I should make this clear, our first attempt of making her kneeboard. Go ahead and play that video. Rara, smile! So you can hear her sobbing right at the end of that video. And here's the problem. Okay, I brought the knee board in right here. Here it is. And what happened was we put her on the knee board, and listen, I see problems before they happen. I'm a super high controller, and I knew that we front loaded that knee board. We put her too far forward on it. And I wanted to tell my wife, change it, but I don't want to be that controlling guy. I was like, it'll probably be fine. But she ended up face planting, and now she's in the water. And I'm like, Aurora, get back on the knee board, And she's like, no, losing her mind, right? So I dove in the water like Japanese Baywatch, which is a terrible show because you jump in the water and drown immediately, right? Because I can't swim. I have no life jacket on, and honestly, 75-foot rope, I barely made it back to the knee board. I was like huffing and puffing, and Aurora immediately sees me, and she's like, no, Daddy, no, don't make me get back on the knee board, because she knows, she's seen me do it to, her siblings. There's no quitters in my family, right? I want Mommy, not Daddy. I'm like, nope, you're getting back on the knee board, and she's got those big blue orb eyes full of tears, and no, Daddy, no, right? So I have a video of the second attempt, and before we play this video, I want to instruct you to listen really closely to the sound of my daughter screaming and crying before I made her do this, because you can't hear it, and then you hear her cries get drowned out by the motorboat, and I want you to watch her face as the boat gets going. Go ahead and play that video.
Here you go!
Immediately smiles, right? Immediately. She gets up now. She got up, no problem. And she got back in the boat, and she could not help but grin. Oh, that little girl was so proud of herself. Woo, it was the high of her day, kneeboarding. And we got home, and she immediately ran to her grandparents' side of the house because they live with us, and she told them about it. She's like, I got up, and, the next morning she was talking about how she was a kneeboarder and how proud she was and how she was a big girl. And to be clear, she begged me not to make her get back on the knee board. She desperately wanted to quit. She did not want to take another try. Had I not been there, she would have never kneeboarded again for the rest of her life. I'm confident. Like that would have been it. That would have been the end. And why would she not have done it? And here's the reason. It's because she lacked the vision to see beyond her feelings. Her feelings were so overpowering, and her experience was so limited, and her self-discipline was so undeveloped that she would have chosen to not experience that. But because I was there, and I was an authority as her father, I made her do it. Because I had the vision to see the benefit, right? Now, I didn't enjoy making her do it in the moment, but I had the wisdom and insight to know that we would both enjoy it after the fact. And even if she didn't get up, I know that as her father, it's my job to give her determination and grit and to teach her to push through her negative feelings. Here's a big question. Today. I want you to think about this. This really matters. Even if you're not a Christian, this is a really good question. Who in your life will make you get back on the knee board? Who in your life? Who do you have in your life? I think most of us miss out on the end of the world that we want because we fall off the proverbial knee board in whatever arena it is of our life, and we have no one in our life to make us get back on it. Did you know that sociologists say that most character development stops by the age of 16? For most of us, our grit, our self-discipline, the quotient of our ability to push through hard things, to put off the things that we want now for the things we want most, is determined by the age of 16. And it's not because there's some biological or neurological force that comes into play at the age of 16. I just think that culturally in America today, once we reach the age of 16, there's really no one left that can make us get back on the proverbial knee board. Your parents are like, yeah, can we spank them at 16? I don't know. We stopped that at 12. We can't whoop them no more. So, think about it when we were, when the older people today were younger, you could get whooped at 16. But today, that just doesn't happen, And think about it with me, okay? Think about it with me. Those of you who are adults, okay? Ladies who are married, I want you to imagine how mad at your husbands you would be if your husband was like, get back on the knee board. You're not getting back in the boat. Okay, you're getting back and you're crying like, honey, I don't want to. Get back on. That wouldn't work at all. You'd be in divorce court in an instant. Judge Judy would be like, yeah, and whatever, and things and reads. It'd be done. Married men, how ballistic, how intergalactically angry would you be at your wife for making you get back on the knee board? Get back on the knee board, you wimp. It's like, what? Who you calling a wimp? I'm not getting back on that knee board if I don't want to. There's no way. There's no one in our life who can make us do hard things. And I think one of the big reasons most of us are like, yeah, I don't try things anymore. I'm an adult. The reason why we stop doing it is after the age of 16, we no longer respect, fear, and submit to an authority figure in our life enough to try new hard things. And some of you all, and this isn't going to make sense to some of you, but some of you all, you quote some of my sermons out of context. There's a sermon that I'm going to link in the description to this talk about envy. And I gave you this phrase called, that's not my garden. And anytime any of you guys fail at something, you just say, well, that's not my garden. And that's not what that sermon was about at all. It was about envy, not about quitting. You know, we're just looking at a God-given calling in our life, and it's like, well, it's hard, so I'm just going to quit. I think in America today, there's an epidemic of people, Christians included, who are quitters. Your job's hard. It's like, well, I quit. I just, I feel overwhelmed. I can't push through my negative feelings, I don't want to develop. I don't want to grow as a person. I've fallen off the kneeboard. I'm just going to quit. I'm going to get a different one. Family's difficult. Well, I'm just not going to talk to my sister for 2 months. I'm just going to quit. Friends are mean. I'll just get new ones. I'm just going to quit. I'll just get new friends. I'll just go whatever and scroll and TikTok and like and whatever. Life's hard. I'm just going to move to a different city. I'll just quit. It's easier. I've always wanted to go to a warm climate anyway. Marriage is hard. Just quit. God wouldn't want me to be unhappy. I'm out of here, whatever. I'm just not getting back on the kneeboard because my feelings. And the cost of this is devastatingly high. Because when we don't get back on the kneeboard, we compromise on our dreams. The reason we miss out on the end of the world that we want, the reason why that Super Bowl commercial was so devastatingly, heart-piercingly accurate is because sometime years ago, we fell off the proverbial kneeboard and we just didn't have anyone in our life who had the authority to look at us and say, you're not going to quit, you get back on it. Question, when was the last time that you tried something hard, scary, and new that you'd already failed at once? Most of us, we might try something hard and new one time. But if we fail at all, it's like, I'm done. I quit. It's over. I'm not going to do it anymore. And here's the fundamental issue with our dreams at the end of our life not being what we want it to be. Right here. Most of us want to do great things with our life. But for Christians hearing my voice, I know you want to be godly. I know you want to leave a legacy of faith. I know you want to be successful on some level, irregardless of your faith. But when we fall off the proverbial kneeboard and we're older than 16, there's an epidemic of people who have no authority in their life that they'll submit to help us overcome it. So there's a sanctification problem in our life. As soon as we fall off our faith in one small way, the process of God's presence in our life growing is stymied. And spiritually, the end of the world that we dreamed of, the end of the world that we hoped for, I'm going to follow Christ, I'm going to leave a legacy of faith, I'm going to do these great, we fall off, and because we have no one we trust to tell us to get back on it, we just stay off it. My favorite story in the Bible about this process is the story of King David. David falls off the kneeboard big time, but he actually shows us how to get back on it. David was the greatest king in the Bible. He was the second king of the nation of Israel, and he's remembered for being a man after God's own heart. Now, to some of you, that doesn't sound like a compliment, but believe me, in the Bible, it's a big compliment. Sometimes my wife says that to me, John, you're a man after God's own heart. I'm like, girl, say it again. I'm coming home, yes. It's high praise. He was charismatic and handsome and talented. David was a warrior. He was a brutal, savage leader. He was empathetic and compassionate. He was the whole package. He was Mr. Everything. And he had dreams of loving God and finishing well above anything else. That was what he wanted to do. Love God, finish well. But unfortunately, David compromised his character in the middle of his life. And it's a reminder to me that even the best of us, even the most faithful of us, if we're not careful, can compromise our character, right? I look at some of the worst, most brutal criminals in human history, and I just think, it's easy to compromise your character. It happens. And David does something that nobody expected he would do. He ends up having this home-wrecking affair with one of his dear friend's wife. Her name is Bathsheba, and she gets knocked up. And sadly enough, her husband was off fighting a war for King David. So it's like really, really bad. It's really bad. And David immediately goes into cover-up and damage control, right? That's what any leader who's compromised does. And ultimately, he calls, Bathsheba's husband's name is Uriah, and he calls Uriah home from the war, and he's like, hey, you should go spend a night with your wife, because he's thinking Sally Jesse Raphael hasn't been invented yet, there's no Jerry Springer, we ain't doing no paternity tests, none of that, so if he just sleeps with his wife one time, I'm scot-free, like it's gonna be good. But Uriah's like, hey, all my comrades are off fighting this battle, I can't do that, and David's like, shoot. So ultimately, he engineers this man's death at war. And in his mind, he rationalizes it. He's like, I'm not a murderer. He's going to get killed by the enemy. I'll put him in this super risky spot, and then the other guys are going to kill him. I'm just sending him off to war. I'm not really a murderer. Isn't that funny how we rationalize what we do? Keep in mind that up to this point, this guy had been super full of integrity, really godly. Everybody admired him. But he reaches this place in his life, and many of us have been there, where there's no longer anyone who can correct us. Right? There's no one who could say, get back on the kneeboard. He is like a classic American today. His news feeds tell him only what he wants to hear. Everyone who disagrees with him is labeled something evil. He's unpatriotic. He's un-American. He's ruining the country. He's a bigot. He's a racist. He's a man of privilege. And what he does, and this is what we all do, isn't it? Is he disguises his selfish desires in a modicum of morality. Isn't that what we do? Oh, here's why what I'm doing is right. Here's why I needed to do that. I mean, I am the king. I have to send people off to war. I have to make hard choices. And what's crazy to me is King David manages to make himself feel like a victim despite being king. And isn't that a common mentality today? I mean, we all live like kings and queens. We live at the greatest time in human history, in the greatest country in human history, and yet so many of us manage to feel like a victim. It's like, how? Like, we have such great lives. I mean, we're sitting there and we feel robbed because, oh man, so-and-so in my life only got to live 65 years. It's like, oh my goodness, the average life expectancy for all of human history up until a minute ago was 35. Like, we have good lives. And his attitude sounds bad, but his mentality is common. Spiritually, he falls off the knee board. He gives up on integrity. His heart is disengaged from God. And we do this spiritually in our lives all the time, don't we? We compromise and we fail a few times and then we just stop caring. I'm not getting back on the knee board. It's fine. I mean, I'm still a good person. I don't need to be on that knee board to be a Christian. And his spiritual dreams of sanctification and growth that he has as a child are gone. And at this point, his spiritual legacy would be erased. There's no way his kids would want to follow Christ. His dynasty spiritually would have been completely over. But then he gets visited by a prophet, the equivalent of a pastor or an elder in his life. This guy's name is Nathan, and I like Nathan. Nathan is an Enneagram type 8, just like me, right? Nathan tells it like it is. 2 Samuel 12, verse 1, it says, "So the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb that he had bought. And he raised that little lamb, and it grew up with its children, and it ate from the man's own plate. It drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter." So basically, he was like a pit bull owner, like just loved it so much, everything else. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man, but instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd to feed the guest, he took the poor man's lamb and he killed it, and he prepared it for his guest. And all of us today, I mean, if you took someone else's pet and you used it for food, that would be a bad thing. David was furious. He said, "As surely as the Lord lives, any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one that he stole and for having no pity." Isn't it interesting how when we deny sin in our own life, we get angry at everybody else? And I think that's what happened. I mean, sin is written on our hearts, but when we say, "Oh, I'm not a sinner and I'm a good person," all of a sudden we start feeling like a victim. We point the finger at everybody else. We get judgmental and angry, and everybody's out to get me, and this country is so messed up, and that group is screwing it up, and that group is screwing it up, and I'm a good person, and they're a bad person. This is David, and David has blinded himself completely to his own sin. And we do this all the time. And how do we do it? We shield our sin in what? A modicum of morality. God doesn't mind. He wants me to be happy. God gave me this desire. How could I not indulge myself in it? Here's why I'm the exception. I mean, God says that in his word, but I'm an exception to his word because whatever, and I know that God loves me and he'd never want me, and I'll just ask for forgiveness later. I'll just whatever. And here's why I don't need to get back on the knee board. I love Nathan. He tells this story. It's a setup. And he pulls David in and he gives him the right hook right on the jaw. It's a knockout punch. It says, "Then Nathan said to David, 'You are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel, and I saved you from the power of Saul, and I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed?'" I love, he doesn't mince his words. It's horrible. What you did is horrible. It's not like, "Oh, it's understand. I mean, I've done that too." He's like, "No, dude, terrible. That was terrible. For you have murdered," and I love that he calls it what it is. And this is what we do. We try to relabel our sin. Well, here's why it is, not that bad. And, I didn't really kill him and I just sent him off to war. And Nathan's like, no. David, you murdered him. You murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites. And then you stole his wife. I mean, he doesn't mince words. He says, "You fell off that knee board. What are you doing? This is wrong. This is not who you wanted to become. When you first became king, when you set out, you are a man after God's own heart." He's saying, get back on that knee board. Get back on that knee board. You're not going to keep doing this. And David's response is perfect. 2 Samuel 12, Verse 13 says, then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned. I have sinned against the Lord. And he repents completely and immediately. Now, David is kind of interesting. He's a warrior. He's a killer. He's a charismatic leader. He's confident. He's brutal. He's strong. He's been generally uncompromising, but David is also a musician. I mean, he really is Mr. Everything. I think it's so interesting, the character of David. And he actually, when he gets upset, he writes music. And the book of Psalms, many of them are David's songs that he's written. And Psalm, just song, that's what it means. But Psalm 51 is David's most famous song. Many of you have read it and have heard of it. And the most famous line in the most famous song is Psalm 51, verse 10. David says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right. Another translation says, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. He says, I'm tired of this up and down faith. I'm tired of this faith that says, God, I need you to make me steadfast, and only you can do it. The Hebrew word for create is actually the Hebrew word bara. And it's the same word that's, interestingly enough, used to describe God creating the world and the Garden of Eden. In the beginning, God barad. He created the heavens and the earth. And what David is saying, and he's referring back to last week, he's saying, you know what? My sin has separated me from God. I can't bear to be in his presence. God, I need you to create me something new like it was in the Garden of Eden. Create in me a clean heart. I need you to change me and renew me. I need you to change me from the inside. And he recognizes his sin was pushing God from his life, and he's repenting, and he's asking God to make him new again. And there's still earthly consequences of sin. He loses the respect of his kids. He loses part of his kingdom, but God restores him and forgives him, and he gets a second chance. So again, I want to ask you this critical, super important question. I think it is among the most critical in our lives. I want you to get this. Who in your life can tell you to get back on that kneeboard? Do you have a Nathan in your life? Because if the answer is no one, I'm really concerned. The average American has over 400 Facebook friends, but less than 2 close friends. And that's down from 6 2 decades ago. That's a remarkable reduction. I mean, you think about the sociological changes across American society today, there's lots of things we can point out, but one of the ones I'm most concerned about is the dramatic drop in close friendship. Most people have very few close friends. And over a quarter of Americans will say they have 0 close friends. I would actually raise that number because I don't think a close friend is someone that you hang out with and see regularly. That's not enough. A close friend is someone who can look at you and say, get back on that kneeboard, like Nathan the prophet. Someone that can look at you and say, hey, I want to call this sin out in your life. What you're doing is wrong. It's seriously wrong. It's sinful. You're rationalizing it, and it's wrong, and I want to call you to repent and change because I love you. Who in your life could do that? Who in your life could look at you and call you out for something that's going on in your life, say, hey, I love you, I want to call you out, even if you're not a Christian? Is there anyone in your life who can say, you're compromising your character, I see the end of the life that this is going to lead to, it's not what you want, you need to change? Who can do that? For most of us, the answer is nobody. The answer is nobody. We might have someone who's an Enneagram type 8 who would say something, but we'd cut them off after that. We'd run away. No one intends to give up on our goals and dreams and godliness and spiritual growth. That advertisement, that Super Bowl commercial, I mean, we see it and it's like, oh, that is so true. I mean, that's so many of us. And we give up on our dreams because why? Because we lack a friend like Nathan. And we get swept up into this moment. We get impatient, hurt, lonely, bored, whatever, and we just compromise. Somebody that we love dies. Somebody we love gets sick. You know, we face a tragedy, and there's this crisis of faith. Listen, nobody sets out and is like, you know what? I dream someday of being penniless and destitute through my golden years. I want to live on a tiny fixed income, begging money from my kids and not having enough to pay for my prescriptions. I would love that. Nobody says that. Nobody says, you know what, I want to be morbidly obese and have a double knee replacement and lose the last 15 years of my life. Nobody says, I want to be spiritually, empty and barely saved. But we push anyone who forces us back on the kneeboard out of our lives. Don't talk to me about money. You don't know about my money. I'm going to work till I'm dead. You don't know anything about me. Don't tell me about my food. I got a thyroid problem. You don't know me. You don't understand the struggles I'm going through. I mean, this is all I have. Don't talk to me about who God is to me. I don't need to go to a building to believe in God. You don't know my heart. I still have great faith. Who do you think you are? It's what we do. And this is why we compromise on our faith. And I would tell you, this is why in-person church attendance really matters. Gathering together in a community at Hebron, at Wheatfield, I think part of this is why we have pastors and elders in our life, in a general way, right? To tell us to get back on the kneeboard. But that's not good enough, because you could just selectively ignore the most piercing parts of the messages on the weekend. You could just ignore it. And these messages are not necessarily customized to your specific need. That's why Christian community is so important. I mean, connecting on the weekend, I think it matters. Having people who know you, hold you accountable. Volunteering on a team. I think it's important to have someone who can, where you been? What's going on in your life? And I'd say on a deeper level, joining a life group. Some churches call them small groups. They're places we can go to weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly with the goal of building some community. And here's my real hope. My real hope is that we can find a Nathan in our life, and we can be a Nathan for somebody. I mean, there are so few arenas in American society today that we can actually connect with somebody. And connect on a level where they could actually hold us accountable. We have 66 life groups at this church. You can sign up on our website. Our website is unbelievable. There's a catalog of them that show you when they meet, where they meet, what they're about. Some of us have had bad life group experiences. The good news is that if you have one bad experience at a restaurant, it doesn't mean that all restaurants are bad. And I think we need someone to tell us to get back on that kneeboard. So today I want to challenge you to get a mentor or a coach in your life. Join a life group today. Next week, we're going to go more in depth into what this stuff looks like, but I want to close with this story. I met Jeff Wright, who spoke here 2 weeks ago. I met him 22 years ago. And he has been a great friend, but what Jeff Wright is to me is a Nathan. And he really, really is. And him and his wife, Diane, they visit our family once a year. Whether or not they're speaking, they just come to sow into our lives, and I'm so grateful for him. And nearly every time he confronts me about something, which is great. Like, he's not afraid to be a Nathan in my life. But a couple years ago, specifically, he gave me a good blast to the face. He punched me right square in the jaw. He said, "John, I've been watching the way you're working and then coming home and disengaging. And he said, I want you to know you're going to lose your daughter's hearts if you keep doing this. And they will find the approval that they're seeking in the arms of another man." He said, "John, you need to get a hold of your family, because I've been watching you and your heart is not in your home, it's at work." And he said, "I want you to give your kids what your parents gave to you, which is a heart for Christ and his kingdom." He said, "I know that you want your daughters to be in heaven with you." And he said, "I'd hate for you to spend eternity with so many people from your church, but have you failed to minister to the women that God has entrusted to you?" Those are some pretty harsh words. And it was on this trip, right after we caught that fish, that he gave that to me. And it felt like a punch in the face directly. And not a lot of people could say that to me. I want to say, "Who do you think you are?" And you don't know, and whatever, and I'm doing, and I'm a fine dad, and whatever. But listen. He said, "John, I want you to visualize the end of the world, the end of your world. I want you to visualize your dying day. Are your daughters going to be in the room connected to you with their hearts?" And here's the thing. Those words changed the trajectory of the end of my world. I would have been in a vastly different place on a family level right now had I not had him to tell me to get back on the kneeboard. Jeff Wright has been my life group leader for many years. He has been such a meaningful thing to me and my friends. I mean, we still connect. I'm so grateful for him. It's Life Group Sunday, and I just wanted to say to our church, who in your life can tell you to get back on the kneeboard? Who in your life can confront you? I think that we have so many of us where no one really knows us. We have no Nathan in our life, and we have a lot of friends and family. But I think a lot of times friends and family, they just tell you what you want to hear. And family in particular, you get so sensitive around them. Don't confront me and whatever, and you fight, and a lot of us revert to whatever. Nathan is somebody who can tell us the godly truth we need to hear. Who in your life can do that? As we close, I want to ask you to stand to your feet. I just think that I think there's a lot of us today who have been struggling with loneliness and disconnection. But I think more significantly, there's a lot of us who have been struggling with a lack of growth. I think there's a lot of us who have had kind of this roller coaster faith where the presence of God in our life has kind of just been stymied. And I think as a lot of us visualize the end of our world, when we die, when we face God, like if we're honest, based on the choices that we're making right now, our dreams are dying and we're not headed to the end of the life that we want. I'm just really concerned about it. I look at the church in America today, I look at our church, and I just think, man, a lot of this is not what we want. And I guess I just like your permission for a moment to be a Nathan in your life. And I don't know if this is for all of you, but I know this is for some of you. You need to hear from a Nathan in your life. You need to hear, get back on the kneeboard. You need to get back to church. You need to get your faith back. You need to get back into God's Word. And some of you might say, Pastor, I'm getting a little old and I feel like it's too late, but I'm here to tell you the middle of your life isn't the end of it. And if you're not dead, then God's not done. So get back to it. Get back onto it. Get back into it. Get back into life group. Get back into prayer. Get back to your family. Get back to Jesus. Get your dreams back. Get your vision back. Look at your family and lead them back to God's house and say, as for me and my house, kids, we're serving the Lord. We're